So, but thank you very much. But first and foremost, I'm a filmmaker, not a speech maker. And as a filmmaker who prefers normally to be behind the camera, not in front, for me to stand here in front of you and to make a speech is quite daunting. But the importance of J Street as an organization that allows thinking different and acts for the right vision of Israel brought me here tonight. I was born on November 4th. Until the 4th of November 1995, it was just my birthday. Since then, it is the day that changed my life forever. Ever since that horrific moment, that when Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish Israeli, I've been haunted by a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. I wonder whether we will be able to make a better future for our children. Most of my friends and loved ones live now in a state of acceptance and complete fatalism. We have been sentenced to continue to wield our swords for the foreseeable future, resigned to living with the stifling feeling of having no way out. As the forefathers of Zionism once said, one hand grabbing the plow and the other grasping the dagger. Most of Israeli got used to that way of life, and today, only the margin of Israeli society are aware of the horrible price this existence is costing us in all areas of life. This indifference comes from a growing desperation among entire sector of Israeli society, which have given up hope of one day solving the conflict. Instead, they try to ignore its existence and live their lives in a bubble. This feeling and the desire to discover how we got here were the reasons that led me to make the Gatekeepers. I was often asked why I wanted to tell the story through the eyes of the head of Shin Bet, the Secret Service. The answer is simple. Because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is their area of expertise. The Shin Bet, more than any other organization in Israel, is in charge of that. Its leaders have helped shape the history of the modern Middle East. They worked closely with prime ministers, fighting terror and other threats to Israeli democracy. Their opinions and predictions affected governmental policies in the West Bank and Gaza more than anyone else, and the decisions were often matters of life and death. Those same men are still here today, and they understand that the reality that has shaped our lives in Israel shows no signs of changing anytime soon. I interviewed them during 2009 and 2010. Many people have asked me how I persuaded them to participate in the film. How did I manage to get 5 former heads of Shin Bet and one who was still in office? I interviewed, by the way, Yuval Diskin while he was still head of Shin Bet, active head of Shin Bet in his headquarters in Tel Aviv, to speak so sincerely and openly. I never asked him that question, well, basically because, you know, when you get they say, we will come, you don't really question why do you come. You are just happy to get the interviews. In hindsight, I think that they wanted their expert point of view to be heard. But most of all, they know that the windows of opportunity to solve the conflict and to reach a two-state solution is closing, and it's closing fast. It's hard to put into words the emotional turmoil I experienced during these interviews. I often had trouble falling asleep afterwards. What was very clear was how exceptionally talented the Israeli leadership needs to be in order to successfully face the complex challenges posed every hour of every day, and how clearly our leadership, past and present, did not measure up to the task. After the movie came out, I was often asked what was the most shocking or difficult revelation of my interviews with the former heads of Shin Bet. My obvious answer was the numerous times in which reality could have been changed by the government and the missed opportunities on both sides that followed. We have had too many short-sighted leaders who put their own careers or the short-term interest of their political party over the long-term strategic interest of the country. Their failures have led thousands of dead and wounded on both sides. It has spawned hatred, helplessness, and hopelessness. After Barack Obama gave his speech at the International Convention Center in Jerusalem, I received a call from the head of Shin Bet, Ami Ayalon, who was especially taken by the part in which Obama talked about young people's needs to get up and act over their leaders' heads. Ami reminded me that he made the exact same plea in his interview for the Gatekeepers. Here is a quote from the relevant section of Obama's wonderful speech, which brought momentarily hope to many Israelis, but soon after drowned in the swamp of reality. And Obama said, Israelis must recognize that continued settlement activity is counterproductive to the cause of peace, and that an independent Palestine must be viable, that real borders will have to be drawn. But for the moment, put aside the plans and process. I ask you instead to think about what can be done to build trust between people. That is where peace begins, not just in the plans of leaders, but in the hearts of people, not just in the carefully designed process, but in the daily connection that takes place among those who live together in this land. Speaking as a politician, I can promise you this, and this is important. Political leaders will not take risks if the people do not demand that they do. You must create the change that you want to see. I know that this is possible. And in an interview with Ami Ayalon, he said to me, and part of it is inside the film, when I meet with young people, which I do often, I tell them the following story. I was born in the Jordan Valley. I had a wonderful childhood. And I knew that there is a house in Jerusalem, and on the second floor there is a long corridor. And at the end of the corridor there is a door. And behind the door there was a wise man who makes decisions. He thinks. My parents called him the old man, Ben Gurion. Years later, after the Yom Kippur War, I went to Jerusalem and went to that same building and climbed to the second floor and found that there was no door at the end of the corridor. And behind that missing door, no one was thinking for me. Now the question was what to do with that information. I have to admit that what happened to me in hindsight was very positive. I realized that if there was nobody there, then I had double the responsibility. I knew the weakness of leadership and the helplessness of taking action even when you know you must. And we have a job. We have to wake up each morning knowing we have the ability to make a change, that we have the tools to make a change, and that in moments of crisis, we have the duty to make a change. While working on the Gatekeepers, I watched over 1,000 hours of archive footage from all over. The material that documenting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was as if no lesson had been learned throughout the years. The same archive footage go over and over and over again and again. The young soldier in black and white film reels taking in the Kasbahs of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967 intermingle with colorful digital images of young soldiers today. The grandchildren of the Six-Day War soldiers continue the work of occupation. Each and every photo and frozen frame tells the story of Israeli occupation and the price Israeli society is forced to pay because of that. We all know what a permanent agreement between Israelis and Palestinians should look like. Everybody in this hall, and I'm sure everybody in Israel and in the whole world knows how it will look at the end. In all its details and nuances. The question is how much time and how many victims will it take to finally get there. On that evening, on the 4th of November 1995, on my birthday, before I heard the news about the assassination, I remember saying that for the first time in a long, long time, I felt that there was a hope that my two little kids then would grow up to a different reality. My kids have grown up. Both of them, Amnon and Mika, are serving in the Israeli army as we speak. Their reality did not change. The last words of Yitzhak Rabin, when he sang in the square the song for peace, were, "Don't say a day will come, bring the day. Al tagidu yom yavo, haviru et hayom." This was his last will and testament, and it binds us every day and every hour. Recalling the conversation with the heads of Shin Bet emphasized to me that pessimism and fatalism were not a viable option. I realized that the acceptance and despair were no way to create change, and that we all have a moral obligation. Each and every one of us must do all that is in our power to make sure that a change will come. This is the message that everyone who holds Israel dear to him should carry out with him and act upon. Thank you very, very much.